On this day, 24th of December 1846, the British took possession of the island of Labuan. The island of Labuan is now part of Malaysia. It's a federal territory. It's a federal territory because it was a separate colony for most of its existence before Malaysia became a thing. It used to belong to the great Sultanate of Brunei. Brunei during the 16th, 17th and into the 18th century was quite a powerful empire in Southeast Asia. Now it's a tiny little country, a rump of its former self. But when the Spanish first arrived in the Philippines, one of their greatest enemies and most deadly enemies was the Sultan of Brunei. The Spanish had to take Manila from the Bruneians, who were then occupying it. They had control of much of western Philippines at the time, the Sulu Islands, parts of Luzon, and the Spanish had to fight them to drive them out. Brunei also had control over most of northern Borneo, and they were an expansionist empire. A very powerful one and a very rich one. They dealt in slaves, as well as trade to China and to the West. And they were friends and allies with various Arabic and Turkish regimes. So it wasn't unusual to see mercenaries from the Middle East fighting in the armies of the Sultan of Brunei. So, as we know, the 19th century was a time when the Europeans finally managed to get the upper hand on the various expansionist powers in Southeast Asia. Brunei began to fade as a power, but they were determined not to disappear, and they turned to the British to help protect them from the Spanish, from Chinese pirates, and from rebellions within their own kingdom. Into this stepped a man called James Brooke. He was born in India and grew up in the East India Company. He was educated in England for a short time before coming back, and when he got an inheritance, he bought a ship and went out to the Malay archipelago, and he was quite impressed with the place, and he went into the service of the Sultan of Brunei, suppressing piracy and helping the Sultan to crush rebellions against his rule. Eventually, after restoring the Sultan to his throne after quite a severe rebellion, the Sultan of Brunei granted him the title of Raja of Sarawak, which is a large part of Malaysia now, which is on the island of Borneo. And so he became known as the White Raja. And he was to rule Sarawak until his death, and after him came two more White Rajas. So it's an interesting tale of Europeans going to Asia and becoming kings or rulers in their own right. But it was after he was given possession of Sarawak that he started to urge the British to take the island of Labuan. He saw that it could be a very handy place for anchorage for the Royal Navy in their campaign against piracy and slavery in the area. he went and negotiated with the Sultan of Brunei. Now, about 60 or 70 years earlier, the Sultan had offered the island of Labuan to the British in return for them protecting him and his empire. Well, he would have been a different monarch at the time. And this time, though, the Sultan didn't want to give up the island of Labuan. Not that easy. After the Spanish had taken Manila and the Sulu Islands, Labuan, which before had been desolate, no one had lived there, it became an important port for Brunei. And he didn't want to give up so easy. But the Royal Navy came in, and unfortunately the Sultan's palace was by the sea, and so it was intimated that if he didn't sign the Treaty of Labuan, which granted Labuan to the British in perpetuity, that, well, there are cannons on those ships, and they could theoretically fire into the palace. And so he was kind of pressured into it. And for Labuan becoming a British colony, James Brooke became Sir James Brooke, as well as Raja of Sarawak. And he became the governor in 1848 of the island of Labuan. At the time, there were great hopes that Labuan, like Hong Kong and Singapore, could become a great city in the Far East. And they had a great port. It was a good island with islands surrounding it, good anchorage. There was a lot of promise. And one of the most important things, there was coal on the island. And this being in the mid-19th century was very important. You need coaling stations for your naval vessels. Unfortunately, Labuan never really lived up to its promise. The coal ran out pretty quick. Investors started to leave. They didn't see that it was going to be a great trading city. Unlike Singapore, which is at a nexus of trade routes, Malacca Strait on the other side and the Far East on the other. Perfect position. Hong Kong is at the mouth of the Pearl River, with the massive civilization of China before it. Labuan had only Borneo. Sure, there was Brunei, but most of the island of Borneo was jungle. There wasn't much in there, and you couldn't really go very far into the country before you'd be stuck and probably get malaria. So it never transformed into the great port city that they initially thought it could. But the island of Labuan did become British on this day, the 24th of December, 1846. If you like these videos, come back for more tomorrow. Like, comment, and subscribe.